It appears as though her own family was violently racist. Check this account out of Harris's grandfather. At the command of the overseer, he proceeded to strip off part of his clothes and laid himself flat on his belly, his back and his buttocks being uncovered. One of the drivers then commenced flogging him with a cart whip. The whip is about 10 feet long with a short, stout handle and is an instrument of terrible, terrible power. It's whirled by the operator round his head and then brought down with a rapid motion of the arm upon the recumbent victim, causing the blood to spring at every stroke. When I saw this spectacle now for the first time exhibited before my own eyes, with all of its revolting accompaniments, I saw the degraded man and mangled victim writhing and groaning under the affliction. I felt horror-struck. This is the worst of not American history alone. This was Jamaican history. The rest of the account is even more horrifying, including a passage with the beaten man screaming, "Think me no man! Think me no man!" This is horrifying. But it's really odd considering Harris has expressed support for reparations and payments to descendants of former slaves. I mean, my family wasn't here, so we didn't engage in that, but her family did in the worst way. So I don't know if this, I don't want to say white guilt, is Jamaican guilt or just her own guilt of the whole thing that makes her want to do this. But I can understand, and perhaps her and her family should cut a check to any descendants that they whipped and lynched. Now, she hasn't just talked about the possibility of reparations. She's actually introduced policy to make reparations happen. And I can understand with that kind of guilt going on in your family, especially if you kept it quiet until this year. Now, I could go on for hours showing you examples of Kamala Harris calling people and things racist. For instance, one thing is infant mortality rates. Harris, who tweeted that implicit racial bias is one critical reason that the maternal mortality rate for black women is 3 or 4 times higher than white women. She is blaming here maternal mortality rates on racism. She also has been heralded as a savior to the people of color everywhere, which is great. Of course, this was before they knew about her grandfather or great-grandfather. But the sentiment is wonderful. The idea is important. But we should be very, very clear that Kamala Harris is not Martin Luther King. What MLK stood for is what we need in these days. And that's not what's happening. Her connections to actual racism, it adds a new angle to statements like these from Harris.
Is President Trump a racist?
Well, look, when you talk about his statement on that, when you talk about him calling African countries S-hole countries, when you talk about him referring to immigrants as rapists and murderers, I don't think you can reach any other conclusion.
So you definitely would agree that he's a racist?
I do, yes, yes.
I guess it's cool now to say that the president is a racist because that's what you're thinking, and somebody else will just go, I can see what you're thinking. I don't know if I agree with you, but yes. It's good that we can have that conversation now, isn't it? Okay, so as you're watching that, remember, this is a woman whose family actually owned, beat, whipped, and lynched slaves. But I am the guy who says you as an individual are not responsible for your forebears. You're not responsible for your father's sins or your grandfather's or your great-grandfather's sin. But that's not what she believes. Someone isn't racist just because their ancestors were slave owners, which is incredibly rare to begin with. But that's the whole argument with reparations. We should just take a moment here to appreciate the irony that someone who has proudly advocated for reparations and called people racist is a descendant of a slave owner and one who was lynching people recently, no less. I mean, now I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. She's her own person. But that's not how we think when we think like a collective, like socialists do. Surely someone as vocal about the evils of racism would be an ambassador of better relations. Surely she would follow the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which she didn't do with Donald Trump. She just went right for, he's a racist. I don't think MLK would have done that. MLK looked at the content of the character, not the color of their skin.